the bridge of the Varen Solis was silent except for the sound of Ambassador Thessa Corin's breathing, ragged and uneven, as she stared at the viewport. Outside, a single human vessel hung in the void. Small, scarred, utterly unremarkable, and yet every sensor operator on her ship had gone pale the moment its transponder code registered. "That's not a rescue ship," her tactical officer whispered. "That's the Ash Grave." Thessa's claws dug into the armrest of her chair. 3 hours ago, she had sent a distress call to the nearest Deathworlder relay station, expecting a supply frigate, maybe a medical vessel if she was fortunate. Instead, the humans had sent the one ship whispered about in Kaltari War College's ship that ended the Vren blockade with a single maneuver, the ship no alien admiral wanted to meet in open space. Why, she breathed, would they send that for a diplomatic ambassador and 40 stranded souls? She would get her answer. But not the one she expected, but none of this had begun that way. 3 days earlier, the Kaltari embassy vessel, Varen Solis, had been drifting through the Korvath expanse on a routine cultural exchange mission, carrying 41 souls, diplomats, scholars, and a handful of junior officers, toward the neutral station at Belhaven. The Kaltari were an old species, elegant, and cautious, their civilization built on centuries of careful diplomacy. After nearly destroying themselves in ancient wars, they did not trust easily. They especially did not trust humanity, a species barely 200 years into interstellar travel yet already infamous for surviving things that should have killed entire fleets. Then, the engine core fractured. It wasn't sabotage. It wasn't an attack. It was simple bad luck, a stress fracture in an aging coolant manifold, the kind of unglamorous failure that never made it into history books. But out here, in the expanse, unglamorous failures killed just as effectively as war. Thessa Corin, the ship's senior ambassador, had never expected to be the one giving evacuation orders. She was a negotiator, not a captain, but when Captain Avril collapsed from radiation exposure trying to seal the breach, someone had to make the call. "Send the distress signal," she ordered. "Every frequency. Every language we know." Her communications officer, a nervous young Kaltari named Bellis, hesitated. "Ambassador, the nearest response-capable vessel is a Deathworlder patrol ship. Do we want them to find us first?" Thessa understood the fear. Humanity's reputation preceded it everywhere. Stories of them fighting through impossible odds, refusing to surrender, even when logic demanded it, doing things no other species would attempt. The Kaltari called them, the wound that keeps fighting. It wasn't meant as a compliment, but death was death, regardless of who arrived to prevent it. "Send it," she said. "I would rather owe humanity a debt than owe the void nothing at all." Everything changed in the next few seconds. The signal went out. And somewhere, 4 light-years away, it was received by a ship humanity had built not for conquest, but for something far more personal. Captain Elena Vasquez had been asleep for 6 hours, her first real rest in a week, when the alert tore through her quarters. She was on her feet before she was fully awake, muscle memory carrying her through the corridors of the ash grave toward the bridge. "Talk to me," she said, sliding into her chair. "Distress beacon, Kaltari registry," her XO, Marcus Webb, reported. "Diplomatic vessel, 41 souls, catastrophic engine failure, their venting atmosphere in Section 3. Elena's jaw tightened. The Kaltari were not allies of humanity, they weren't enemies either, they occupied that uncomfortable middle ground of species who watched humanity with wary, calculating eyes, uncertain whether to extend a hand or keep a blade ready. "Time to intercept, at maximum burn, 6 hours, Captain." "But," Webb hesitated, "Command wants to reroute the Solvent Grace instead." "She's a medical frigate, better suited for." "Denied," Elena said. "We're closer, we go." Nobody knew what the human was hiding. What Webb didn't know, what almost no one outside high command knew, was why the Ash Grave carried a crew complement 3 times larger than any comparable vessel, why her medical bay held enough capacity for 200 patients, why her captain had personally requested this deep patrol assignment after the disaster at Meridian Station. 4 years prior, Elena Vasquez had been the first responder to Meridian. She had arrived 11 minutes too late. 3,200 people had died in those 11 minutes. Waiting for help, that came just shy of soon enough, she had rebuilt her entire career, and eventually this entire ship, around one principle. Never again 11 minutes late, set course, she said. Full burn, and Marcus, wake the medical teams, all of them. 2 hours into the burn, the sensor officer's voice cracked through the bridge. Captain, I'm reading a second contact on the same heading as the Kaltari ship. Unregistered signature, weapons hot. Elena's stomach dropped. Raiders? Vareth's scavenger pattern. They must have picked up the distress call too, probably hoping to strip the wreck before anyone official arrives. The council had made a terrible mistake, and now someone else was about to pay for it. SADT on the scavengers versus our own arrival. They'll reach the Varen Solis roughly 40 minutes before we do, Captain. The bridge went silent. 40 minutes was more than enough time for Vareth raiders to strip a defenseless diplomatic vessel of anything valuable, and leave no witnesses behind to report it. Then we don't have 40 minutes to spare, Elena said. Marcus, redline the reactor. I want every erg of power we can pull without cracking the containment field. Captain, that's outside safety tolerances, I'm aware. Her voice didn't waver. Do it anyway. The Ashgrave shuddered as her engines screamed past every rated limit, alarms chiming warnings that Elena silenced one by one without looking away from the forward display. Somewhere behind her, a junior engineer whispered a prayer under his breath. Nobody stopped him. The truth was, Elena had gambled with her own ship's life before humanity even knew whether the Kaltari were worth saving. They shaved 18 minutes off the scavengers' head start. Not enough to beat them outright, but enough to matter. The Ashgrave dropped out of transit exactly 5 hours and 47 minutes later, 13 minutes ahead of projection, engines glowing white-hot from the strain of a burn. Most ships couldn't survive intact. Aboard the Varen Solis, Thessa watched the massive vessel emerge on her screen. And for a heartbeat, cold dread eclipsed her hope. The Ashgrave was not beautiful. She was built like a closed fist. Armored plating layered thick over weapon emplacements, her hull scarred with the story of battles Thessa didn't recognize. This was not a ship that had come to negotiate. The council had made a terrible mistake. Teeth, she thought, gripping her console. We called a warship to a dying vessel. Ambassador. Bellis called out, voice tight with fear, they're hailing us, put it through. Elena Vasquez's face appeared on the screen, human, tired-eyed, streaked with the kind of exhaustion that came from a burn. Most captains would have refused to attempt. There was no arrogance in her expression, no triumph, only urgency. Kaltari vessel, this is Captain Elena Vasquez of the U.S. Ashgrave, we received your distress call. Do you require immediate evacuation? Thessa found herself unable to speak for a moment. This was not the tone of a conqueror. This was the tone of someone who had done this before, many times, and hated every single instance. Yes, Captain, we have wounded, our engine core is failing. Copy that. We're deploying shuttles now. My medical staff will need access to your wounded immediately. Ambassador, I need you to trust me on timing. We don't have room for diplomatic caution right now. Before Thessa could answer, a new contact bloomed on both their screens, a smaller vessel, jagged and predatory, closing fast from the debris field. Captain, Bellis shouted. Unknown ship approaching, weapons signature detected. Elena's expression hardened instantly. Vareth scavengers, they think they beat us here. She didn't hesitate. Weapons free, defensive pattern only. I want them turned away, not destroyed if we can help it. Marcus, put yourself between that ship and the Kaltari hull. Nobody had expected a rescue mission to become a standoff. The Vareth ship fired a single warning shot across the Ashgraves bow, testing, probing, the way scavengers always did before deciding whether prey was worth the risk. Elena didn't return fire. Instead she opened a channel on the radar frequency, her voice flat and utterly without fear. This is the Ashgrave. That ship is under active humanitarian evacuation. Withdraw now, or the next round won't be a warning shot. For 3 long seconds, nothing happened. Then, without another word, the Vareth vessel peeled away into the dark, unwilling to gamble against a ship whose reputation had clearly reached even the scavenger lanes. Thessa let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. You didn't even raise your voice. I've learned that scavengers respond better to certainty than anger, Elena said simply. Now, your wounded ambassador, please. The truth stunned the entire galaxy, though of course, in this moment, only 41 frightened souls aboard a crippled ship would ever know it. What followed was not what Kaltari doctrine had prepared Thessa for. Human shuttles docked within 4 minutes. Medical teams. Not soldiers, not negotiators, but doctors and rescue specialists, swept through the Varan SOS with a coordinated efficiency that bordered on choreography. They didn't ask about diplomatic status. They didn't inquire about political alignment. They triaged by injury severity, full stop. A young human medic, barely into her 20s, worked frantically over Captain Avrel, stabilizing his radiation burns with equipment Thessa had never seen. Compact, elegant, clearly refined through hard-won experience. "Why are you helping him first?" Thessa asked, unable to stop herself. "He's not even conscious to know you're doing it." The medic didn't look up. "Because he's the one who's dying fastest. Rank doesn't matter here, ma'am. Species doesn't matter, just the clock." That wasn't even the biggest surprise. Because as the evacuation continued, Thessa discovered Captain Vasquez herself, sleeves rolled up, physically carrying an elderly Kaltari scholar through a smoke-filled corridor, not directing others to do it, but doing it herself, breathing filtered air through an emergency mask, while the woman in her arms wept in gratitude and confusion. "Captain," Thessa said when they reached the evacuation point, "you didn't need to do this personally." "Elena," set the elderly woman down gently, checking her pulse before answering. 4 years ago I commanded a ship that arrived too late to save anyone. I promised myself I'd never let that happen again, not to my own people, not to strangers, not to anyone I could reach in time." She met Thessa's eyes. "So yes, I need to do this personally. Every single time." Thessa had overlooked one crucial detail. She had assumed humanity's fearsome reputation was built on aggression. She had never once considered it might be built on grief. The final evacuation came down to the wire, literally. As the last shuttle prepared to disengage, the Varan Solace's core breached entirely, sending a shockwave that nearly crippled the departing craft. Elena, still aboard, was the last one through the airlock, diving through the closing doors, as the old embassy vessel folded in on itself, in a silent flash of destroyed metal. The Queen suddenly froze. For that was what the Kaltari called their High Ambassador, back at Belhaven Station, and when she received Thessa's full report days later, she sat motionless for nearly a full minute before speaking. "They sent their most feared warship," the Queen finally said, "and it saved every single life aboard, including yours, at the cost of nearly destroying itself in the burn to arrive in time." "Yes, my Queen, and the captain, this Vasquez, she carried the wounded herself, with her own hands, everyone she could reach." The Queen was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the stars beyond her chamber window. Stars that suddenly felt less foreign, less threatening, than they had only days before. "Draft new terms for the humans," she said at last. "Not as strangers to be wary of, as neighbors we misjudged." Aboard the Ashgrave, Elena Vasquez stood in the observation deck, watching the wreckage of the Varan SOS fade into the distance behind them. 41 lives, safely tucked into her ship's quarters, instead of drifting lost among the debris. Marcus Webb approached, quietly, offering her a cup of recycled coffee that tasted like victory and exhaustion in equal measure. "Commands asking why we burned the engines that hard for a species that barely tolerates us," he said. Elena took the cup, wrapping cold fingers around its warmth, thinking of Meridian Station, of 11 minutes, of 3,200 names she still remembered by heart. "Because someone called for help," she said simply, "and I decided a long time ago that the answer to that call is never going to be a question of who's asking." She looked out at the stars, endless, indifferent, full of ships that might one day need saving, full of species that might one day learn what humanity had always known in its bones. That strength wasn't measured by what you could destroy. It was measured by how far you were willing to burn to make sure no one arrived too late again.